focusing on the callers having their own rental investment properties, or is it in the purchasing or selling on account for others? I'm not focusing on. Let's get.
I think there's a lot of good questions that come out from all those things. I was personally thinking that it would be interesting to hear your battle stories, your war stories, if you will, of when you've had difficult tenants, if you had to remove them, or if you've had to deal with them. Also, if you've had any tricks along the way when you're vetting somebody, if you're going through the process of selecting tenants, if there's been any methods you've had that worked well to kind of weed out some of the ones that might be more difficult.
All right, well, let's do this. I'll start with a scenario, and then you all can pepper me with questions after that. At least it'll get the thought process going. So right now, rental properties are pretty much a premium, just like trying to buy a property is a premium. Low inventory, it's very competitive, and if you have a rental property that's coming available for re-rental or turnover, as I refer to it, you have to really plan on how you're going to deal with the inquiries. So I put a rental property on the market on Tuesday, and by Wednesday I had 18 inquiries and 7 showings. So everybody was competing to try to get it over the other guy, to get in there quick, because they couldn't find anything to rent. And this was just a nominal price property, $825 a month, 1-bedroom apartment, which actually was a premium for a 1-bedroom apartment, but it's on a lower price scale. It's not a $2,000 or $3,000 rental property.
Right.
So the question I think you need to ask yourself, and this is stuff that you may create along the fly, but you should keep track of it so the next time you've established a pattern. And the important thing is to be consistent with the way you handle the rental property inquiries. So the goal, of course, is to avoid any fair housing complaints being filed against you.
Sure.
And that's always a huge concern in the rental property business, is complying with fair housing. So the best thing that I can tell you is have a policy on how you're going to schedule your showings. Have a policy on how you're going to accept applications. Have a policy on how you're going to score or make a decision on your applications. I call it rental qualifying criteria. And my rental qualifying criteria guideline is actually a 3-page document, which is my guidance document to myself on, for example, will I accept a cosigner on the application? And for my policy, they have to. I want the tenant to have some skin in the game, and if it's unless it's a student housing property, where the student is not going to be working, the applicant has to qualify for a minimum of 75% of the minimum income to rent that property. I'll accept a guarantor or a cosigner to kind of add on when there's a little bit of a deficiency in income, but I'm not going to take a guarantor for the whole thing. I want the person who's on the lease to have some skin in the game. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That's great.
All right. So that's one of many qualifying criteria. So once you've gone through and decided on your criteria, let's say you get 3 people who want to submit an application. How do you decide which one of those applications you're going to accept. Is it the first one in that that applied, or is it the best qualified, or do you have a scoring system, which assigns points towards different categories, like how long they've been on the job, how stable is their income, do they have any late fees, and so on. Do you have a scoring model that you would apply? And you have to make that decision and then pick the strongest application based on your qualifying criteria. So the point of this introductory discussion is, if you don't have qualifying criteria that you can refer to and use over and over and over on every application, then you must create that now. That's your first order of business, is to create that. And you would contact, think about what's important to you. Is credit score critical or not? I mean, credit scores in Harrisonburg are historically low because there's an awful lot of people with, medical charges against them that went to collections, and that lowers their scores. So going by that number alone is not necessarily the way to go. Or you can exclude the things off of their credit report, like credit judgments for medical, or judgments for a gym membership that they signed up for but didn't follow up on. That's the kind of stuff you have to make the decision on. So that's your first order of business, is create your qualifying criteria, how you're going to decide if you have multiple applications, and have a policy on how you're going to schedule appointments, show the properties, and collect applications. So that's the topic to get you started. What questions do you have on that?
Well, that's pretty fascinating. I really like that, because in that, would you tend to have a time, if you're going to get multiple applications, where applications can be submitted? Because in the past I've thought about first come first serve would be the way to go, so I can avoid fair housing violations. But it sounds like with your system, you have the ability to discern who's the best qualified, and you can prove that you've used the same criteria over and over and over again, so that would probably allow you to not do first come first serve and have like a period of time.
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at your qualifying criteria and make sure that on the face of it, it's not being discriminatory. But
Sure.
But first come first serve. I mean, the goal is to get the strongest rental applicant. I mean, if I had someone who, for example, had never rented before, there is no landlord reference, am I going to take that person over someone who has rented before and I got a good landlord reference from, and a second landlord reference from? Am I going to get? Am I going to be better to take a person who has income? One person applies and they're working temporary jobs and getting assigned to different positions, or am I going to go with someone who's been on the same job and earning a wage that's been increasing over the past year or two? I mean, it's you look for stability, and you look for reliability, and you look for successful history. So, those are things that I look for in a rental property or a rental prospect qualifying. Is how likely are they to pay? How likely are they to take care of the property? And how likely are they to stay for the term that I'm looking to keep them for? I don't want to have to turn the property over every 6 months or 8 months when they crap out of it.
Yeah. Steve, do you have any qualifying criteria that just over the years you've found to be kind of core? Like, for example, income. Maybe you say, okay, the rent's $1,000. You need 2.5 times your net take-home pay in order for that to qualify. Like anything similar to that, or any core qualifying criteria that you've really found to be necessary?
as far as minimum income, I would to try to weed out the number of people that are going to apply. You have to decide, and you might have different criteria for different properties. For example, if you had a $2,500 a month rental, you might want a very tough and very narrow qualifying criteria to get a strong candidate for that property. So you might not be willing to be flexible on a lower credit score or waiving delinquencies or collection accounts. Whereas if you had a rental property that you bought and it's in a tough rental market to try to get it rented, it's a more modest price, not as upscale a property, and you want to be more liberal because your chances of getting that class top quality tenant is going to be marginal, then you might have two different A qualifying criteria and B qualifying criteria, and apply them to the different properties. So the one set of criteria may not be apropos for every property in your portfolio.
Are you looking at their gross or their net income?
I look at the gross, and then I ask them for information about their recurring obligations, such as car payments, alimony, mortgage, credit cards, any recurring charges, and most of that will show up on a credit report.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So you don't have like a set like debt to income? I'm in the mortgage business, so like we use like a debt to income ratio. Do you apply that for like your rentals?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a rent to income minimum. So, for example, it would be so many months times the rent would be the minimum income. So, if you had 36 times the rent as your minimum income, or 40 times the rent as your minimum income, and you pre-qualify your applicants on the phone before you waste your time to go show it and say, here's my minimum income, do you meet that? Then, that's dealing in gross. Most people know their gross. But then I also have a minimum debt to income, so rent plus your recurring debt to income ratio, and that might be 50% as opposed to 30%. So I give them a little bit of allowance for some recurring debt, but not a lot. So yes, I would have two qualifying income ratios, one based on just the rent and one based on rent plus their recurring debt. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me, for sure.
Okay.
I did have another question. It'll come to me in a second.
Well, James is thinking, is there any services that when you're in the property management business, are there any services like Cozy or something that you've really used to help with tenant applications and screening that might be helpful to share with some people? Or
Sure. Yeah, I do run a credit report, and I always run the credit report before I run a criminal background check, and I do both. I also do a OFAC check, which is a State Department check for the Office of Foreign Asset Affairs, to see if I got anybody on the terrorist watch list. So that would, that's kind of important right now, with all these people crossing our borders, but we don't know who they are. So, those are the three tests that I contract with a third-party provider, and there's lots of companies out there. The Equifax or the TransUnion can do the credit, but you also need a company that can do the criminal and the OFAC OFAC background check also. So that's one type of thing I do. I do check Facebook. I do just Google their names. I do check the local jurisdiction based on where they say they're living now and where their identification is, showing that they have, lived. So their driver's license might be, 6 years old, but at least it's an address that they lived at one time. So I'll do check the court records. That's online, for those people as well. So just a Google search, a Facebook search, credit report and criminal history, or all the types of searches, that I'll do. And then a lot of times you catch people on who they say they are, but they aren't. There's also a book that you can buy, and I do buy it. It's called the ID. Let me think of the name of it now. It's escaping me. But it's a picture. It's a book that they update every year, and it has a detailed picture of every driver's license in the country. So that, and I have caught people using false IDs. So it's called the if you want the book name and where to get it, Matthias can email me tomorrow and I'll reply with that information. But it's the ID check guide, I think it is.
Yeah, I see one called ID Checking Guide 2020 International Edition.
Yep, they're about $25. And I do double check the IDs against that, because sometimes people will try to modify an ID, and then you can catch where the hologram was or something like that, but it doesn't appear on yours, or the information they're using an old ID that wasn't valued. They'll modify an Ohio license to look like a North Carolina license, or vice versa. If someone's got a history and some baggage they want to try to hide, they're going to go to some pretty extreme efforts to disguise who they are.
How much? So with you doing the 3 background checks, credit, criminal, and OFAC, how much is the third-party application fees running you that I'm sure you're passing through to the tenant then, roughly?
You can charge whatever you want. If you're going to accept a voucher program application, and I think the most you can charge is $50. And if you don't accept them, you have to justify the cost. Anything over $50, so you have to explain why you charge more than $50, for those applications. But one of the things that is cropping up now is a lot of companies, you can't contact them. They have third-party companies to verify their employees, and those companies now charge. So you've got your fee that you have to pay to Equifax or whatever company you're using for your background checks, plus you got to pay the fee to the employee's company to get that verification. So it can be expensive and time-consuming. So, but the answer to your question is that typically around $50 is the most that I see people charging in the area. If you just go online and look at 3 or 4 of the local rental companies and see what their application fee is, that'll give you a pretty good idea.
Okay. And are you generally charging per applicant, so per adult applicant, or just charging one for the application? So if they, both adults are on that application, it'd be one $50 fee. The reason I'm asking is just because, personally we're doing it and it's costing us about $25 to do the full background check, credit check, everything. So if you have 2 and you have to run 2 checks, then obviously you're eating $25 if you just charge $25 for the entire application, but have 2 to process.
Yeah. Everybody, again, it gets back to what your policy is. So if your policy is that everybody who's going to be in the residence that's age 18 or over needs to be qualified to do your background checks on, then there's your policy. And you need an application processing fee for each one. Or like you said, eat it if you don't. So that's part of your criteria, that you write down what your policy is. And if your policy is everybody age 18 or over must go through the background check and pay an application fee, then there's your policy and you stick to it. So that, if you get a group of 2 or 3, then everyone's got to pony up. So it gets expensive sometimes for the applicants.
Do you get a lawyer? Do you have a lawyer or somebody that you go to write up these policies, or is it just something that you write up on your own?
Well, after being in the business for 40 years, a lot of it is, meeting with other people in the business and, at conferences or education programs, and looking at everybody, looking at dozens and dozens of companies' policies and trying to modify mine to to pick up little nuggets from theirs and add them to mine, and they do the same about mine to theirs. So it's a culmination of networking and experience. There are attorneys who would help guide you in that department, but the answer to your question is most of that stuff I got was derived from just networking with other investors and property managers around the world.
It's probably the best way to get it, because you're, the people that are in the field, in the trenches, day in and day out.
Yeah, I think once you have what you think is your set of criteria, that's when you might send it to an attorney and just say, is there anything on the face of it, this process or this procedure or this criteria policy, that you would be concerned about having to defend me if there was a fair housing case brought against me. So, I would go to someone who specializes in fair housing, and there are attorneys, if you Google that, who do specialize in fair housing cases and landlord-tenant representation.
It's
you might find that a lot of the property managers and other investors in the area, if you have network groups, which it sounds like you have one, you just have like a forms exchange. Realtors have a little bit more criteria that confine them in that, we can't collude to try to create policies among ourselves so that we all might discriminate against a particular protected class. So, it's a little bit more challenging, to have group meetings, but a one-on-one meeting, is certainly a good concept of trying to visit with people and get some advice. But, large groups, if you're a licensee, I would avoid. I would stick to one-on-ones.
And Greg just posted in the chat, there are several good books that include a step-by-step guide to tenant screening, and he specifically mentions Landlording on Autopilot. That's by Mike Butler. That is a really good book for if you're needing help putting criteria together.
Yep, there's Melissa Prandy has a good book, Prandi. She's a very successful property manager out of California. She wrote a good book on introduction to property management, and she covers that section pretty well.
What was her name again?
She's big on list.
It broke up a little bit.
P like Peter, Randi, Prandy.
Okay.
I'm seeing the Complete Idiot's Guide to Success as Property Manager.
Yep. So yeah, there's a number of good books out there.
I'm curious if there's any apps out there or websites that are, good for property management that you guys have used or recommend at all?
Is this as a private investor
Yeah.
that you're thinking?
Yeah. Just one-on-one with the tenant.
There, what's the Mr. Landlord is one.
Okay.
There is an association of independent landlords, and they have actually conferences and education programs and all kinds of networking. So it's you can look for different associations. There was a local valley here in the Shenandoah Valley. I don't know if they still exist, but there was a group of investors that got together, and it was Shenandoah Valley independent investors or the landlords group. So it sounds like you got the makings of a user group right now. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I love that stuff so far. I guess one thing I would also be curious about is what do you have any advice as to when you do need to get a tenant out, how to proceed that if it's difficult?
Well, I think one of the things I'll mention, since I was in the business as a property manager, I believe that I gave value to my clients, and I've had thousands of landlord clients like yourselves over the years, and they wouldn't have been paying me a fee if they didn't feel like there was a benefit, to them for the services I provide. So at some point, you're going to realize that you're better off making money doing whatever your day job is, and let somebody else manage your investment, your rental investment. So at some point, you're going to need to interview property managers. That's another discussion. But if you're going to do the one or two and try to go alone, that's going to be a big learning curve. So you might give consideration to interviewing a property manager, and then just being actively engaged with them to see how they do their business, because they've got the procedures and the policies and the forms and the network for repair technicians and so on, and you can learn off of them. I can tell you, I had an awful lot of people who used me for a year and then went out on their own to go manage it themselves after I trained them how to do it. So it might be something to consider is hire a property manager and learn how to do it through that property manager. And especially if you have to get rid of someone. And the question was, what do I do if there's, I have to evict? The Landlord-Tenant Act, we're now down to one set of laws. There used to be two different sets of laws, but there's now one. And it's about a 30-page document, and you should read that because you're automatically, included in having to follow those sets of laws. So you have to go to the Virginia Residential Landlord and Tenant Act, and you should read it cover to cover and refer to it every time you have a situation before you respond, because most of these things are covered, and the procedures and the timelines and the step-by-steps are spelled out in this act of what you need to do. So, that's the best advice I give you right there. And if you're not inclined to do that, then hire an attorney to send the paperwork so that you're in compliance. If you screw up on not sending the notices out properly or timely, then you're going to find yourself waiting 3 weeks to get into court. The judge saying, "Sorry, you'll have to refile," and then you've lost another month's rent. So, spend the money on an attorney who can get it done right on the first time. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Does anybody have any follow-up questions with that?
I kind of wanted to go back to what previous point. Do you inspect like their current properties when you are evaluating applications?
All right, you broke up a little bit, so I might be getting close to a dead zone. Say that again.
Have you ever went about inspecting like their current property or like where they currently live before when you're evaluating applicants?
Do I inspect where they currently live?
Yeah, I've met a landlord who out in DC. He does that. He goes and does like a walkthrough of like where they currently live before he, when he's.
No, I don't do that. One thing that I do, and this is I pull the tax record on, which is public record on that property where they say they currently live, and identify who the owner of that property is and see if that name matches up with the name as their landlord on the application. Because a lot of times tenants will give the name of their cousin who they're renting a room from at that address, and they'll give you the cousin's name as the landlord instead of the owner of the property. So that's always a good practice is, pull a tax record, make sure that the owner of the property is the person you're calling for the reference.
That's great.
But I don't go inspect the house where they live. I might do, if it's local, I might do a drive-by to see if the address exists.
Or if it's close to, you could do a drive-by, James, like Steve's saying, and if the outside's an absolute mess, then you know what the inside's more than likely like too.
Yeah,
for sure.
The neighbors outside, nothing wrong with asking a neighbor a question or two.
So have you had any horror stories or experiences where you're trying to evict a tenant or going through that process where you need to get somebody out, and you know how the process normally goes where you go get your unlawful detainer, all that stuff, but it just really got drawn out or something that was kind of out of the ordinary? And have you had anything like that happen, Steve?
No, never had a hiccup in the process. What's probably the most common? I think one of again, it's stuff you learn from experience. So when I file my unlawful detainer, for the person who's on the lease, then I file a separate unlawful detainer, and I pay the extra fees to the court and to the service processor and all other occupants. And that's the name of the occupant, any and all other occupants, in addition to that named person who's on the lease. And the reason I do that is a lot of times the person who I lease the property to is gone, and they just let their cousin or friend move in and take over living at the property, and they're the ones and they pay their rent, but then they run out of money. So you're trying to evict someone who's not even on the lease. So that was a good little trick that I learned when I showed up for an eviction, and we got a judgment for process for one person, but someone else was living and in possession of the property that we didn't know about. So that way that way the sheriff throws everybody out on the day of the eviction, no matter who they are.
And by doing that, you said you just put "and all additional occupants" on the unlawful detainer in order to get that accomplished?
Yep, John Doe and any and all other occupants. And you have to pay an extra filing fee for that.
Have you ever had a tenant, so let's say the judge awards you that unlawful detainer for non-payment or, violation of lease or whatever? Have you ever had a tenant appeal that?
Yeah, I've had appeals that took it to trial. The only time I can think of when I lost was when I tried to charge a tenant for rekeying the locks, and they told the judge that they left the keys inside the house, and that they were told that was okay. And I said, no, it's not. You have to return the keys to deliver possession. So I had to break in and pay for rekeying the locks. And the judge said, well, I'm not going to give you that $40 or $80 or whatever it was. But no, they'll appeal it to try to buy more time. But typically, once judgment's been granted, they got 10 days to appeal before you could file with the sheriff to do the eviction. Yeah.
So just out of curiosity too, so if someone would have appealed in that 10-day period before you can file the writ of possession, then how long has that process generally taken you if it did appeal and have to go to trial? Like a couple weeks, or this is really like a very rare situation, but.
No, the judge knows that that's usually a stall tactic, and they put it on the docket pretty fast. So it's not your typical 18 days. Usually it's within a week.
Yeah, you just got to go to trial and get it all squared away.
Right. Now with the CARES Act, and this COVID, complications, there are a whole bunch of new requirements that you have to go through and hoops you have to jump through. So, and this was all done to protect the tenants and try to avoid evictions. So you've got to be very careful not to violate those federal laws, or else they can come after you and get triple damages against you. So that, be sure if you're having to go through this process that you comply with any of the CARES Act provisions that are in effect right now.
Any other questions for Steve about?
I'm curious. What was your first rental property, and I guess describe your tenants and how. Was it a big learning experience? Any difficulties when you started out?
You mean a rental property that I invested in personally? My first one?
Mm-hmm.
My first rental property was one that I was actually the tenant. I was unemployed, I had no money, and I wanted to buy a piece of real estate. So I found an investor who was willing to put up the cash, and then bought a townhouse, and I got a roommate, and my roommate and I rented the property, which I co-owned with that investor. We agreed that I would manage it for free during the time period, and then we would split the profits on a sale at the end. So that was my very first investment, was half of a townhouse that I lived in. I owned half and I rented half.
Did any of the other tenants know you were an owner, or was that kind of a secret you kept?
No, absolutely. Transparency is key.
Okay.
So they knew exactly that I was an owner of the property, and I had a lease, on it, and that's how I got my start on rental properties. And then I moved out, did the exact same thing 2 more times. So I ended up with a half of an ownership interest in 3 properties, and that investor loved me. And eventually I was able to get a job, save some money, and those properties were profitable. That I was able to start buying rental properties on my own thereafter.
That's awesome.
So you could either be the investor and find someone else to be the tenant to co-own it with you and take care of it. You own half and they own half. They took the depreciation. Only one person could, I let them have all the depreciation because I didn't need the money, the deduction. So you can craft those things a lot of different ways.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you.
Sure. Something that's starting to crop up again is one thing that I did was I would buy model homes and then rent them back to the builders. And I love those tenants because they didn't cook anything and didn't use any appliances. And they paid all utilities. You always got upgraded properties because they want their models to look really good. So Matthias, I'm sure, knows a lot of builders and developers in town, and they're starting to look for ways to sell their model homes and then rent them back as the model home, and then you get a good tenant for the first year or two in an upgraded property, and usually they'll pay a premium rent.
Yeah, the Preston Lake has that arrangement right now.
Yeah,
their model home is owned.
So I know Pulte was doing that. Ryan Homes is moving to the area. I think they do that. So in fact, I think I saw an ad for one looking for an investor to buy their model home now. So let Matthias sell you one.
Yeah. Chase is also a licensed agent, so we could.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we could work on that together.
Well, however you want to do that. I mean, that's being in the business. That was one of the. I mean, that's my retirement account. I never worked for anybody. I never got a salary from anybody. I never got any company benefits from anybody. I've always been an independent, and so. When I got into the real estate business and got my license, rolling my commissions into the buy or the sale of the one property to the next, I'm already a few percentage into the black on that transaction. If I can manage the property myself, I can save another 6 to 10% on the operating costs. So, if you're a licensee, you get a chance to kind of, increase your, rate of returns significantly while you build a retirement portfolio. That's basically what we're relying on is my rental property portfolio.
Yeah. That's what was kind of funny when you were talking about it. At some point, you should hire a property manager. I'd actually just done that, and if you know how to manage, which there's always things you can improve on, but no one's gonna be able to manage it quite like you do, like care about your properties like you do. I'd interviewed several property management companies. I'm in the process of taking back my properties from the one that I had hired. Unfortunately, nothing wrong against them, but just looked at how much more money you can make if you just kept doing my own and myself. And if you have the infrastructure in place, it's like, why not? It's hard to beat.
Well, it's a question. I counseled an investor the other day. He's got 10 properties right now, and it's putting a little stress on his domestic relationship with his wife and his kids because now he's getting more calls to have to show property or run out and do repairs. Meetings for this or that, refinancings and stuff like that. And finally, I told him, said, you're at a point where you need to put a value on your life, not on your portfolio.
Right.
And you're going to have to hire a property manager, and at some point, you're not going to be your own stockbroker. You're going to hire someone and pay them the management portfolio to advise you, because you can't do it all yourself. So, do what you do best to make your money, and then hire professionals to guide you on your different investment portfolios.
Steve, this is a little off topic, but would you have any recommendations on what to ask and if you're interviewing a property manager? Like how would you determine they're good? I mean, obviously be biased, but
yeah, I would ask for 3 names of references of people that they manage now, and talk to them and find out what they like about the property manager, because chances are that person either managed it themselves or were with a different management company at some point in time. And they're not going to give you people who are upset with them, but they'll give you the names of 2 or 3 people. And if they won't do that, then I'd go to the next manager.
Sure.
But that's the first thing I would do, is interview 2 or 3 people who are currently clients of the firm. You can go on, you can check their reputation, on Google. Of course, they're going to have a lot of negative ones from tenants who are pissed that they got evicted, or pissed that they got charged for, fixing something on the damage that, when they moved out or something like that. So you have to kind of weed through that. But you can look for references from the landlords who hired them to manage their property, not necessarily the tenants. So, and then I would find out who the manager is. Are you going to be and talk to the manager, not just the corporate? Because a lot of times people have separate builder or development people to try to bring in new clients, but then you're going to be assigned to somebody to be in their portfolio to manage, and that you have to find out how many people are they managing. So if they're managing 50 or 60 properties, they can probably give the attention to yours. If they're managing 200 properties, how much time can they devote to yours?
Mm-hmm.
So you want to know how many units are you being mixed in with for that person who's overseeing. And then you also have to decide, what's the management style? And, there's typically 2 types, well, maybe 3. One would be a portfolio type, where someone manages a block of properties, and they always manage all those properties. That 100 properties are their kids. They babysit those 100 properties. That would be a portfolio. But then you might have a department style management, where you deal with Jane on repairs and Joe on rental, and you might deal with somebody else on a repair, a problem issue or legal issue. I mean, you deal with different departments, for every little thing, so you don't build a relationship with that person. So you have to decide what type of relationship do you want to have with your property manager. Does that help?
Yeah, no, that's great.
Are there any, just from talking to property managers, any kind of red flags right off the bat if you're starting an interview, other than not giving out references or other landlords? Any other major red flags with things they might say or do?
I think it's one of the things that I always looked at when I was being interviewed. People were very interested in my involvement in the community. So, it was important for me to make sure that, I stayed in touch with, community activities or, nonprofit organizations, or, just little things like, we would do special events for the SPCA, or we would do something special. We did special backpacks for homeless. We did special things for veterans. I mean, we were engaged in our community, and I think that was a reason that a lot of people enjoyed working with us, is because they saw that we were just not out for ourselves. We were actually part of the community. So that might be something that's important to you when you're interviewing someone. Is are they involved in the community, and what do they do to maintain their edge on the industry? So are they involved in the different associations and education programs where they're keeping up with and have the networking with other resources to stay on top of the industry? So you wouldn't want to go to a doctor who got their license 10 years ago and hasn't been to a class since, would you?
Right.
Yeah, you want someone who's reading periodicals, taking upgraded classes, networking with other doctors, members of associations where they get bulletins on issues. So that's another thing that you might want to verify, is what's their engagement with the industry, as well as what's their engagement with the community.
That's great.
And that's where I spent a lot of my time, was engaging with my industry and my community.
Sweet. Any other questions?
What
See if anything pops up.
commercial properties? I'm curious about that. I don't really know much about it. Like, what criteria do you look for, or how does that work? The application process. You own commercial properties, is that right?
I do. The difference is that the company that's going to be renting the property, they're usually going to want the lease to be in the company's name, so they can write off the expenses through the company.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is whether, and one of the reasons people create an LLC or incorporate is to minimize liabilities. So if the company goes belly up, they can get out from under their debts and obligations, right?
Right.
So if you have the company as the only tenant, and you're relying on the company resources, then that's going to be a problem, and you may need to get personal guarantors where you can hold somebody's personal assets and their other income as a backup or guarantee to the lease. I just did that on one where I leased it to and the owner of the company had to sign, and I made his wife sign too. So that they both had some skin in the game. So that was the backup. I said, I don't know much about your business or how successful you're going to be. You've been doing good this year, but you've only been in business a year and a half. So they had to bear the brunt of the whole rent. If you're going to get a national tenant like a Bojangles or a Starbucks or whatever, you're not going to get someone to personally guarantee it. It's going to be a corporate guarantee only. And then you have to deal with Dun and Bradstreet returns and tax returns, financial reports, and so on. So it depends on if you're buying 30,000 square foot spaces and leasing to national tenants, or you're dealing with buying houses that can be used, or a little strip center and renting out 2,000 square foot spaces. Does that help?
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, if there's any other questions, I know Steve's got, I think we might be running at the end of your time here.
Yeah, I may have passed through that zone and didn't lose you, or if I lost you.
It broke up a little bit
It was
there for a while, but nothing too bad.
Okay, well, it was probably the most valuable information, so sorry about that. So,
But,
well, good luck to you guys. I mean, it's, you know, the world of investing has been, you know, good for me over time. Yet, you know, it isn't without risk, but I think it's a manageable risk. And, you know, there's, you know, the key is, you know, trying to get to the point where you can own your properties and they generate cash flow. Don't rely on the government tax benefits to be the only reason you buy real estate. You know, look at, you know, your cash on cash return. One other thing that I learned as, you know, in my trial and error in buying properties is, I always look for properties that I can do something to improve its value. So, by example, when I first got started, I was buying a lot of condominiums up in the Northern Virginia area. One and two bedroom houses.
You're breaking
So
up.
I got
now.
away from, yeah. So I broke away from those, and I started buying townhouses that I could finish the basement, or single families that I could do something to improve its value.
Did you do
So
the work
that's
on your own, or did you hire contractors?
Yeah, both. A lot of times I did a lot of times I did the demolition on my own, and you know, the cleanup, you know, and running around to pick up parts and materials and stuff like that. But specialty trades, you know, it was faster and more efficient to hire the technician.
Mm-hmm.
don't try to do
So I would be the general contractor, but not the tradesman on everything.
Right.
But that's probably where I made more of my money, was finishing a basement or adding a garage, or, you know, adding a bathroom in an area, you know, doing something to increase the value where I could increase the rents and increase the market value of the property.
This could be like a whole other call, but just for you or your thoughts, what would your rental criteria be, especially in this market for buying a property that you're going to use as a rental? Like,
What would my rental criteria for which property to buy?
yeah, like a lot of people will use a rough rule of thumb, for example, of like 1% of the purchase price is what they need to have in the rents. Do you have any like rough criteria like that for buying a rental property, or what?
Well, that type of philosophy worked really well about 15 years ago. It's coming back a little bit, but it depends on whether you're buying the property for capital gain or you're buying it for cash flow. And if you're buying it for capital gain, that number is not as relevant, because you're banking on in the next year or two that there's something happening to that area that's going to cause the value to increase. Or you're going to do something to that property to create its value, and you're going to flip it and get out of it or raise the rent. So the first question to answer is, am I buying this property for capital gain, or am I looking for a cash on cash return, you know, through rental income? If it's the latter and you're looking for income, then that percentage of 1% of the value as the rent diminishes as the price of the property gets higher. So, you know, that $200,000 property, you might get $1,500 to $1,800 a month out of. So you got, you know, 70, 80% as opposed to of 1%. But if you get to a $450,000 rental property, you're not going to get $4,000 a month. You're only going to get $2,000. So you're at 0.5%, not a 1% ratio. You follow me?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that sounds-
So having a ratio depends on the price point. So if you're looking at starter home prices, you know, your ratio of rent to value, I typically don't even look at them unless I'm getting at least 0.7% of the value as rent. So yeah, that's if that I realize it might be a little bit less depending on the higher price, or a little bit more if it's a lower price. But you know, I can usually make the numbers work as long as there's some other reason that I can create value. If I'm getting 0.7% of the value of the property as the monthly rent.
Yeah, it's very difficult to get 1% around here.
Yeah. So that was the rule of thumb 15, 20 years ago, but that number has come down significantly. Now, I am getting that now on properties that I bought 15 years ago. The rents have finally increased to get me there. But you know, if you're looking at a new purchase first time, you're going to be looking at probably 0.7 as opposed to 1%.
That's great.
Sweet. Yeah. Any other questions? If you don't want to talk, you can type it in the chat too.
Well, I'm getting close to where I need to sign off, so I wish you all the best. If you have questions, pass them on to Matthias. He'll get in touch with me, and I'll try to answer what I can. And I wish you guys all the best you can in the marketplace. Look forward to competing with you.
Thanks so much, Steve. That was great.
Yeah, thank you for coming out, Steve. Appreciate your time.
You're welcome. My pleasure. You all have a good night.
You too. Have a safe rest
Thank
of your
you.
trip.
You too.
Good night.
All right, sweet. Any other questions before we sign off for the evening? Thoughts on Steve or anything?
Now that he's gone.
Yeah, well, no, I just mean, like, if there's anything else that people want to pitch, because we've talked about different things with the 1% rule and different things in the past. Some people go from anywhere from less than 1% all the way up to 1.5% or even 2%. Because that stuff's all typically only relevant for single family, or at least less than 4 for fourplexes for that percentage rule. Once you get above that, it kind of gets thrown out the window. I think the one thought that kind of popped up to me about that too, when he was talking about that, is that percentage really varies with what the interest rate is too, right? So like, we're going to have a higher percentage when the interest rate goes back up, because pricing might compress a little bit on the actual value of properties, and rent should stay pretty stable. So right now it is, finding a 1% deal, like Matthias is saying, is really hard. But that kind of ebbs and flows with the market too. So it's important to factor in your debt and expense ratio. But they're still out there. I mean, I think I've got one recently, and you've got a couple that you're working on, I think, right, Matthias, that are right at that 1%.
Yeah, typically you got to be able to do what Steve was talking about, is add value to it to be able to get there. I think it's pretty hard to get a turnkey rental that you can get the 1% rule on.
Yeah.
But yeah,
what do you see for turnkeys over there in Harrisonburg right now? Probably like less than 7 or 0.5% even.
Probably not half, but you can get like, $220,000 place that would be maybe like $1,400-1,600 a month.
Yeah.
So yeah,
not too bad. Yeah. Sweet. Well, we'll have our next meeting on, let me check. It's the third Wednesday of the month every month. So that is March 16th. If you guys have any suggestions of what you want to hear for next month, feel free to email us, and we can get that squared away. We should have an announcement here within the next week or two. And then the following month, we're looking at having a guest speaker, I believe. Have we gotten them locked in yet, Matthias? Or
no, but I can get on that. I'm sure they'd be happy to.
Sweet.
And Greg, yeah, we have done a short-term rental one in the past. You can go to harrisonburgrei.com if you want to see that again. There's a YouTube video, but we can always do one again this year.
Yeah, and that one's really good. Matthias spoke on it, but it has, how to evaluate them, and kind of like one of the things we was trying to get from Steve is other sites, other resources that are helpful. So he talks about other resources that are helpful for, evaluating and operating Airbnbs and things to check into before you buy one, because sometimes people buy one in the subdivision they buy it and don't allow them, or they don't understand, you get permits and stuff for them. So all that stuff's covered too. But all right, thank you guys for coming out, and I'll see you next month.
Thanks, Chase. See you all.
All right, thank you.